Forest in northern Italy. Year of the Lord, 1375. Night descends slowly, like a dark cloak covering everything. The treetops sway gently, moaning in the wind. The air is cold, humid, thick. You can smell sickness, abandonment, and death. Among twisted roots and leaves soaked with dew lies a man, not on a bed, not under a roof, but on the hard, bare, indifferent earth. His breathing is short, irregular. Each inhalation seems like a battle, each exhalation a surrender. His body burns, fever devours him from within like an invisible fire. His skin, soaked in sweat, trembles uncontrollably. On his thigh, an open wound throbs violently, dark, inflamed, unmistakable, the sign everyone fears, the mark of the damned, the plague. In the cities, those who carry it are expelled. On the roads, they are avoided. In homes, they are rejected. Because in the 14th century, the plague not only kills the body, it kills hope. It kills human contact. It kills mercy. This man knows it. That is why he is here. Alone, abandoned, exiled from the world of the living. For days, perhaps weeks, he has awaited the end, without food, without water, without care, without anyone to pronounce his name. Hunger no longer hurts. Pain no longer screams. Fear has already run out. Only a silent wait remains, a wordless prayer, an inner whisper that barely holds on. And yet, although everything indicates death, although all human logic dictates that this is the end, that man is not entirely alone yet. Because in the silence of the forest, when even the insects seem to have stopped, something unexpected is heard. Footsteps. They are not human steps. There is no crunching of boots. There is no sound of sandals. There are no voices. They are soft steps, rhythmic, 4 paws on the damp earth. A dog slowly emerges from the shadows. It does not bark. It does not flee. It shows no fear. In its mouth it carries something impossible in that inhospitable place. A piece of fresh bread. Real bread. Not hard. Not moldy. Bread like that only found on inhabited tables. The animal approaches carefully, almost reverently. It places the bread next to the sick man. Then it sits by his side, watchful, faithful, like a silent guardian. The man opens his eyes with effort. His vision is blurry, but he distinguishes the silhouette. A faint, almost imperceptible smile crosses his face. He who had touched sores without fear. He who had accompanied the dying. He who had healed bodies and comforted souls is now sustained by an animal. The world abandoned him. Men left him behind, but Providence did not. This scene is not a pious legend. It is not a medieval fable. It is not a symbol invented to inspire. It is a fact transmitted, preserved, venerated for centuries. It is the true story of Saint Roch, a saint who chose the plague-stricken when no one else did, a pilgrim who healed thousands and was brought to the limit of absolute solitude. But to understand how he arrived in that forest, how a nobleman ended up abandoned among trees, how a healer ended up needing to be fed by a dog, we must return to the beginning, to the birth, to the vocation, to the decision that led him to embrace the untouchables and to walk, unknowingly, towards his own Calvary. Because this story does not begin in the forest. It begins with a choice. France, city of Montpellier. Year of our Lord, 1348. The city walls stand firm facing the Mediterranean. Merchants come and go. The church bells mark the hours. Montpellier is a center of commerce, knowledge, and power. A prosperous city, rich, influential. But even in the midst of abundance, there are pains that gold cannot heal. In one of the most imposing houses in the city lived one of the most powerful families in the region, the Decroix family. The father was governor, respected by nobles, feared by adversaries. His word carried weight. His signature decided destinies. The mother, of noble lineage, educated, pious, known for her generosity towards the poor and her deep devotion to the Virgin Mary. They lived surrounded by luxuries, fertile lands, marble halls, creatures who obeyed the slightest gesture, prestige that opened all doors. They had everything, everything the world could offer. Everything except what they wanted most: a son, Year after year passed. The seasons followed one another. Gray hairs appeared, and silence filled the rooms destined for an heir who never arrived. For more than 20 years they begged in prayer. It was not a lukewarm prayer. It was a persevering plea. Endless rosaries, promises made on their knees, fasts, tears shed in silent chapels. Virgin Mary, they prayed again and again, grant us a son, just one. We do not ask for glory. We do not ask for power. Only a son to love and to offer to you. Time passed. Human hope weakened. And then, when many had already stopped waiting, when age seemed to have closed every possibility, the prayer was heard. The woman became pregnant. The news traveled through the house like lightning. The servants wept. The bells rang. The churches were filled with lit candles in thanksgiving. But joy was accompanied by fear. The mother was older. The pregnancy, risky. Every night they commended themselves to God. The delivery was long, painful, distressing. For hours the worst was feared. The doctors doubted. The servants prayed in the hallways, until finally, amid tears and sweat, the child was born alive. A scream, a cry, a miracle. When they placed him on his mother's chest and uncovered his small body, something happened that no one in that room would ever forget. There, marked on his skin, clearly visible, was a red cross. Not drawn, not painted, not engraved by human hand. Marked, perfect, unmistakable. A sacred silence filled the room. Some retreated, others fell to their knees. It was as if God himself had left his seal upon that child. He shall be called Roch, said the father in a trembling voice, like a rock, firm, unwavering in faith, and so he was baptized. They did not know then that this child would not inherit titles, nor govern lands, nor live surrounded by riches. They did not know that that sign on his chest was not an ornament, but a prophecy. Because that child, born among luxury and late hope, was destined to renounce everything to become a refuge for the abandoned, comfort for the sick, and light in the midst of the plague. But that is a story that is just beginning. Roch grew up surrounded by privilege, high stone walls, spacious rooms, fine tapestries, tables always full. From the outside his childhood seemed perfect, but from the inside, Roch did not fit in. While the children of the nobility learned to raise their voices, to give orders, to look down from above, he lowered his gaze. He listened. He observed. From a very young age, the servants noticed something strange about him. He did not shout. He did not demand. He said thank you. When he saw a sick servant, he did not ignore them. He stopped. He asked. He prayed in silence, while the other noble children played at being soldiers, wielding wooden swords and imagining conquests. Roch preferred the backyards, the forgotten corners, the places where no one looked. There he found the poor, the beggars, the sick who approached the gates hoping for a coin. And he did not just give them bread. He sat with them. He listened to them. He shared his food, even if it meant going home hungry. Why do you do that? They asked him. Do not you see they are taking advantage? Roch responded with a disarming calm. If I were hungry, would not I want someone to sit with me? Sometimes he came home without part of his ration. The servants discovered it. They warned his parents. Our son is too soft, some said. That is no way to govern. But his mother, seeing him praying on his knees for the sick, remained silent. There was something in that child that did not come from the earth. At the age of 7, when a plague began to spread across Europe like a fire, Roch did not flee. While many closed doors and windows, he asked for permission to go out. I want to bring bread, he said. I want to pray with them. They forbade it, out of fear, out of love. But the desire had already taken root. At the age of 10, when he saw bodies covered with blankets and bells ringing for the dead, he did not look away. He prayed, softly, with a seriousness unbefitting a child. He did not ask why God allowed the pain. He asked how he could alleviate it, and that was the clearest sign. Roch did not flee from suffering. He ran towards it. At the age of 13, his parents began to talk about his future, a convenient marriage, a political alliance, a position in the government, like his father. The house was filled with important names, with calculations, with legitimate ambitions for a noble heir. But Roch listened to another voice. It did not come from the salons. It did not come from power. It came from the silence, a voice that disturbed him at night, that called him away from gold, and closer to human pain. He knelt before the cross marked on his chest from birth, and felt that this sign was not an honor. It was a mission. Roch did not yet know how, or when, or where. But in his heart, it was already clear. He was not born to command. He was born to love. At 20 years old, Roch's world collapsed. First, it was his father. The strong, respected, feared governor fell ill without warning. Doctors arrived. Remedies, bloodlettings, desperate prayers. Nothing worked. In a few days, the man who had governed a city was reduced to the silence of a deathbed. Roch was there, holding his hand, praying softly. When the body grew cold, something else died with it, the security of a written life. The candles of the funeral were not yet extinguished when illness struck again, this time his mother, the woman who had pleaded for 20 years for his birth, the one who had wept with joy at seeing him born with a cross on his chest, the one who had dreamed of seeing him powerful, influential, respected. The illness was swift, cruel, relentless. Roch kept watch over her again, and was left alone again. In a matter of weeks he had gone from beloved son to orphan, from expected heir to sole owner of an immense fortune. The keys to houses, estates, and warehouses were placed in his hands, the titles, the deeds, the accounts. Montpellier murmured, "He is the richest young man in the city. His future is secure. He can be greater than his father." But Roch did not listen to those voices. In the silence of his room he prayed, and in that prayer the voice that had accompanied him since childhood spoke clearly. It was not a voice of fear. It was not of reproach. It was an invitation. Follow me, not halfway, not when it suits you, not with reservations. Follow me, stripping yourself of everything. Roch rose at dawn and sent for a notary. The man arrived with parchments, ink, and seals. He thought he was going to register inheritances, organize properties, secure the wealth of his young lord, but what he heard left him breathless. "Sell everything," Roch said calmly. "The lands, the houses, the jewels, the barns, everything." The notary looked up confused. "Everything, sir, everything, even the family home also." "And the money obtained," Roch did not hesitate. "Give to the poor, to the orphans, to the widows, to the sick." The notary swallowed. "And you, what will you keep?" Roch looked at him steadily with a disconcerting peace. "Nothing, nothing, nothing, except God." The silence became heavy. The notary thought that this young man was crazy, or that grief had broken his judgment. But Roch was not confused. He was determined. In a matter of days, the impossible happened. The properties were sold, the jewels distributed. The money flowed like a river into the forgotten neighborhoods. The poor wept. The orphans ate. The widows blessed his name. The city was stunned. "Why are you doing this?" they asked him. Roch only replied, "Because none of this belongs to me." When the last possession was handed over, Roch entered the room that had once been his. There were no longer luxurious furniture, no tapestries, no chests, only a simple tunic, a walking stick, and a worn rosary. He put them on. Before leaving, looked one last time at the empty house, not with sadness, but with gratitude. And he said in a low voice, "Now I am free." His destination was clear: Rome, not as a nobleman, not as an heir, not as a lord, but as a pilgrim, without money, without protection, without guarantees, alone, trusting only a providence. Roch crossed the gates of Montpellier on foot, while the city he could have governed watched him disappear on the road. They did not know that this young man with nothing would become hope for thousands, nor that the dispossession they had just witnessed was only the beginning. Italy received him with a soul-chilling silence. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of fear. The roads were empty, the inns closed. The church bells no longer called to mass, but to funerals. Dark marks appeared on the doors of houses, black crosses, drawn in haste, warning signs for the living. "Death is here. Do not enter." Roch walked alone with his worn staff, his simple tunic and a rosary he did not let go of, day or night. At a crossroads, he found an exhausted man, his face covered, his eyes full of panic. "What is happening?" Roch asked calmly. The man looked at him, as one looks at someone condemned. "The plague," he whispered. "The Black Death has returned. Flee, stranger. If you love your life, flee now." Roch observed the horizon. He did not see armies. He did not see thieves. He saw something worse, entire cities paralyzed by terror. The Black Death advanced like an invisible enemy, burning fever, sores that blackened the skin, pains that made one scream until losing their voice. And then, death, sometimes in days, sometimes in hours. The doctors fled. The priests fell one by one. Family members closed doors, leaving inside parents, wives, children. Love had become a deadly risk. And in the midst of that horror, Roch made a decision that no one else was willing to make. He did not flee. He advanced. He entered the first sick city. The streets were covered with bodies wrapped in cloths. Some were still breathing. Others were not anymore. The smell was unbearable. The fear, absolute. People shouted from the windows, "Get away. Do not come in. You will die." Roch did not respond with words. He responded with actions. He entered the makeshift hospitals. He approached the dying. He washed wounds that no one wanted to touch. He held trembling hands. He listened to confessions between tears and fever. When there were no doctors left, he stayed. When there were no priests left, he prayed, and something began to happen. Those that Roch touched improved. The fever subsided. The sores closed. Death retreated. He did not use medicines. He had no remedies. He only did one thing. He made the sign of the cross and trusted. Soon the news spread from mouth to mouth, from street to street, from city to city. "There is a pilgrim, a young man with a staff. He prays, and the sick live." Roch walked like this through northern Italy, from town to town, from corpse to corpse, defying death with a naked faith. While others saved their lives by fleeing, he gave his, without knowing that soon the plague would also find him, but that was yet to come. In Aquapendente, he found what they call a hospital, but it had nothing of a place of healing. It was a dark building, damp, smelling of death, makeshift cots made of boards, sheets stiffened by blood and pus, flies on open wounds, laments that did not cease day or night. There, life and death fought over every breath. Only an elderly religious woman remained standing. The rest had fled or had died. "Young man," she said to him in a trembling voice, "if you stay here, you will not leave alive. Not even the doctors dare to enter." Roch looked around. He saw consumed bodies, unrecognizable faces, people who no longer asked for healing, only that someone not let them die alone. "Then I will die," he replied calmly, "but I will not abandon them." And he stayed. From that day on, his routine was one of absolute sacrifice. At dawn, he cleaned purulent sores. At noon, he carried bodies too weak to move. At night, he held cold hands while he prayed softly. He did not use gloves. He had no ointments. He knew no medical science. He only had faith and a love that knew no fear. But Roch did something more. Before touching each wound, he closed his eyes. He murmured a prayer and slowly traced the sign of the cross over the diseased flesh. And then something began to change. Fevers that would not subsided. Pains that made them scream, calmed down. Black, open, deadly ulcers began to close. Not everyone healed. Roch never promised that, but too many did to attribute it to chance. The sick began to ask for him by name. "Call the pilgrim. Find the young man with the staff, the one who prays." The doctors who remained watched in silence. They could not explain it. They did not dare deny it. "Are you a doctor?" they asked him once. Roch shook his head. "No, I only trust in God." And when someone tried to thank him, he lowered his gaze. "It was not me. It was him." The news crossed walls. It traveled roads. It jumped from city to city. And Roch left when fame began to follow him. He was not looking for recognition. He was looking for the forgotten. Cesena, Mantua, Modena, Parma. In each place, the same scene. fear, plague, abandonment, and a pilgrim who did not flee. He slept little. He fasted frequently. He barely rested. His body was exhausted, but his face seemed to grow, until he finally arrived in Rome, the eternal city, wounded by death. There, even the cardinals feared going out. The churches were half empty, the hospitals overflowing. Roch walked among the sick, like someone entering a battlefield without armor, and Rome began to heal, not because of his power, but because someone dared to love when everyone was fleeing. But the price was yet to come, because no one touches so much human pain without, sooner or later, the cross also reaching him. And so, the healer would become sick. Rome, heart of the Christian world, center of spiritual power, and now also epicenter of pain. The plague did not distinguish there between rich and poor, nor between cardinals and beggars, nor between palaces and alleys. The bells did not stop ringing, not to call to mass, but to announce deaths. Carts traveled the streets at dawn, collecting bodies wrapped in hurried cloths. Some were still breathing, others were not. The fear was absolute. Many fled, others locked themselves in. Some lost faith, and in the midst of this chaos, Roch arrived. He did not enter with speeches. He did not ask permission. He did not present credentials. He simply offered himself. "Do you know what you are doing?" they asked him. "People come here to die." Roch lowered his head and answered calmly, "Then this is where I must be." He was assigned to the places no one wanted: improvised hospitals, infected houses, basements converted into rooms of agony. He slept little. He ate just enough. He prayed a lot. He washed bodies covered in sores. He changed bandages soaked in pus and blood. He held the dying when no one else approached. He never asked who they were. He never asked for reward. He never said his name. To everyone, he was just the pilgrim. But something began to attract attention. People given up for dead were improving. Men who had received last rites were waking up without a fever. Women who could not move were standing up again. Roch did not make spectacular gestures. He did not shout. He did not lay on hands theatrically. He only prayed in silence and made the sign of the cross. "It is not him," he said when someone tried to thank him. "It is God. It is always God." The doctors watched with bewilderment, the priests with amazement, the people with hope. For 3 years Roch lived like this, 3 years without rest, 3 years walking between life and death, 3 years offering his body as an instrument, until one day the instrument broke. One morning, upon waking, he felt a strange burning in his thigh, a different tiredness, deeper, heavier. He tried to continue. He tried to ignore it. But as night fell, the fever arrived. High, devastating. Roch looked at his leg and understood. The plague he had fought had now touched him. He did not complain. He did not ask why. He only whispered, "Thy will be done." He knew what that meant, and for the first time since he began his journey, he decided to leave. Not out of fear of dying, but out of love for others, because he did not want to be a cause of contagion. Without saying goodbye, without explaining anything, without revealing who he was, Roch abandoned Rome, alone, in silence, walking towards his own Gethsemane. Piacenza, an exhausted city, silent streets, bells that no longer called to mass, but to funerals. Roch had not slept well in weeks. His face was pale, his hands trembled slightly, but he continued. He continued entering rooms where the air smelled of death. He continued cleaning sores that no one wanted to touch. He continued praying for bodies that no longer had the strength to respond. Until one morning, as he bent down to help a dying young man, he felt a deep burning, a different pain. He stopped. He slowly lifted his tunic, and his heart sank. On his thigh, the sign he knew all too well had appeared, dark, inflamed, unmistakable. The black ulcer, the mark of the plague. Roch did not scream. He did not cry. He did not despair. He closed his eyes. He had seen that wound on thousands. He had accompanied countless dying people. He knew exactly what it meant. The disease he had fought now lived in his own body. He could have asked for help. People loved him. Many already considered him a saint. But Roch thought of something else. He thought of the others. If I stay, I will put them in danger. And then he made a decision as radical as all the ones he had made before. He did not stay. He did not seek care. He did not ask for medicine. He did not claim privileges. He left. He abandoned the city in silence as he had entered. He walked slowly out of Piacenza, each step more painful than the last. The fever began to rise, his body to fail, his strength to disappear. But his conscience was at peace. If I am to die, he whispered, let it be far away, so as not to be a burden to anyone. He went into the forest. He looked for a secluded place, where no one could find him. There, among damp trees and cold earth, he lay down, alone. The healer had become sick. He who had touched thousands of bodies now had no one to touch him. He who had held dying hands now trembled without a hand to hold him. Humanly speaking, it was all over. But heaven had not yet said the last word, because when man can no longer do anything is when God begins to work in the most unexpected way. And then, in the silence of the forest, something moved in the shadows. Crawling with what little strength he had left, Roch abandoned the city. He did not look back. Each step was a struggle, each breath a pain. His feet, swollen and covered in sores, barely responded. The cane was no longer useful. His body, consumed by fever, was beginning to give up. Finally, the road ended. Before him opened the forest, tall trees, dark, silent. Roch fell on the damp earth, without the strength to get up. There he decided to wait. He did not ask for miracles. He did not demand healing. He did not claim anything from God. He only murmured a prayer, Lord, into your hands I commend my life. And he closed his eyes. Time lost its meaning. Hours, days, perhaps both. The fever rose and fell like a capricious fire. The wound burned. Hunger tightened its grip. Death seemed near. But then, in the absolute silence of the forest, something broke the stillness. A rustling among the leaves, a gentle movement. Roch opened his eyes. A dog appeared from the shadows. It was not fierce. It was not wild. It was large with dark fur and a calm gaze. In its mouth it carried something impossible. Bread. Fresh bread. The animal approached slowly without fear. It placed the bread next to the sick man's body and sat down beside him. Like a guardian, Roch thought he was delirious. He tried to sit up. He could not. But the dog did not leave. It returned the next day, and the next, always with bread. The animal not only brought food, it carried water. It lay down next to him during the night, giving him warmth. It cleaned the wound with its tongue, again and again. Where no one wanted to approach, God sent a creature. Days turned into weeks. The fever began to subside. The pain decreased. The wound stopped festering. Roch opened his eyes on a different morning. For the first time, he felt strength. Slowly, he sat up. He took a deep breath. He was alive. He who had healed multitudes had been healed in the most absolute abandonment, not by doctors, not by religious people, not by men, but by the providence of God, manifested in the faithful dog. Later he learned the truth. The animal belonged to a noble nearby. Every day it stole bread from its master's table to take it to the forest. When the noble followed it, he discovered the dying pilgrim, and he understood that he was before a holy man. Thus, from the deepest humiliation, God restored life to his servant. But Roch would not return to applause, nor to fame. His path was not yet over, and the last test would be the hardest of all. The dog did not belong to the forest. Every morning it disappeared. Every afternoon it returned, always with its snout stained with crumbs, always with the same missing piece of bread. Its master began to suspect. Cotardo was a nobleman of the region, a man of lands, of authority, but also of awakened conscience. "Where do you go every day?" he asked the animal, almost jokingly. The dog did not answer. It just left again. Cotardo followed him. He crossed paths covered with leaves, thicket, silence, until he saw him. A man lying among roots and damp earth, emaciated, covered in sores, on the verge of death, and yet alive. The dog approached the stranger, placed the bread next to him, and lay down beside him. Like a faithful guardian, Cotardo stopped. He immediately recognized the signs: the ulcer, the color of the skin, the unmistakable smell, the plague. According to all logic, he should flee, but he did not. Something in that man stopped him. A strange peace, an intact dignity, even in the midst of decay. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping his distance. Roch could barely answer. "A pilgrim who no longer has the strength." Cotardo hesitated. Fear fought against compassion. But then he remembered the dog. For weeks he had fed him, and without knowing it, he had also fed that dying man. "If my dog did not abandon you," he finally said, "neither will I." Against all recommendation, against all survival instinct, Cotardo carried him. He took him to his house. He prepared a separate room. He cleaned his wounds. He gave him water. He gave him shelter. Day after day, while the world fled from the plague victims, a nobleman chose to stay. And then the unthinkable happened. The fever began to subside. The ulcer stopped spreading. The flesh began to close. Death receded. Cotardo watched, uncomprehending. He had seen many die for less. He had buried healthy neighbors in a matter of days. But that man, he was healing. One morning Roch was able to sit up. Another, he was able to stand. Until finally, he walked again. Cotardo fell to his knees. "Who are you really?" he asked, his voice trembling. Roch lowered his gaze. "No one," he replied, "just a useless servant. God is the one who heals." Cotardo knew then. He had not welcomed just any beggar. He had been visited by a saint, and the miracle was not only the healing of the body, but the conversion of the heart. Because from that day on, Cotardo was never the same. Years later, marked by suffering, with his body weakened by fasting and illness, Roch began his return to his homeland, France. Montpellier was no longer the city he had left. Nor was he the young noble he once was. He dressed as a pilgrim. He spoke as a pilgrim. He lived as a pilgrim. No one saw in him the son of the former governor. No one recognized the heir of the Della Croce family. No one imagined that this poor man, covered in dust and scars, had healed multitudes. Upon arriving in the city, he was arrested. "Who are you?" they asked him. Roch remained silent. He did not defend himself. He did not explain. He did not claim his name or his lineage. He was accused of being a vagrant, a spy, a dangerous beggar. And he was thrown into a cell, dark, damp, forgotten. There he spent days, weeks, months, without trial, without visits, without human comfort. The jailers barely remembered he existed. They passed him food like an animal, sometimes not even that. But Roch did not complain. He prayed. He offered his pain. He united his suffering with that of the sick he had served. His body, already weakened by the plague, began to slowly fade, until one night the prison was filled with light. Not a torch, not a lamp, a light that did not come from this world. The walls seemed to disappear. The air became soft. The cell filled with peace. The guards, terrified, saw the light coming out of the cracks in the door. Upon entering, they found him lifeless. But his face showed no pain. It showed rest. And then they saw it, on his chest. That red cross from his birth shone with a living brightness. One of those present recognized the mark. "It is him. It is Roch, the son of the governor." The news spread quickly. Too late to honor him in life, but not to glorify God in his death. Roch died alone in the eyes of the world, but accompanied by heaven. He died as he lived, without possessions, without titles, without applause, but full of grace. And from that day on, the sick began to invoke him. The plague-stricken called him their protector. The abandoned found a brother in him. Because he who was rejected, imprisoned, forgotten, was crowned by God. Saint Roch, pilgrim, servant, healer of the plague-stricken, became an eternal sign that he who gives everything for love never dies alone. Never. Saint Roch died without titles, without statues in his lifetime, without applause, without human recognition. He died as he had lived, in silence, in poverty, surrendered. There were no crowds around his deathbed. There were no speeches. There were no tributes. Only God. And yet, His life had changed the destiny of thousands. Hands that were condemned to die embraced again. Bodies covered in sores breathed again without pain. Families who were saying goodbye were reunited. All thanks to a man who chose not to flee from suffering and when the whole world was running in the opposite direction. Saint Roch was not a priest. He was not a bishop. He was not a ruler. He was something rarer and more necessary. He was presence. Presence where no one wanted to be. Presence where death seemed to have the last word. Presence where fear had emptied entire cities. That is why when epidemics return, when hospitals fill up, when pain becomes invisible and silent, his name is spoken again, in whispers, in tired prayers. In rooms where hope seems to be extinguished, Saint Roch is invoked not only as a healer of the body, but as a companion of abandonment, because he was there when no one else wanted to be. His story reminds us of uncomfortable but eternal truths, that serving costs, and it costs dearly, that loving truly implies risk, renunciation, and wounds, that holiness is not measured in prestige, but in how many lives you touched when no one was watching, and that God does not always act with lightning or thunder. Sometimes he acts with simple bread, brought by a faithful dog in the middle of a dark forest, because when the world no longer sends anyone, God still sends help. And that changes everything. Saint Roch murió sin títulos, sin estatuas en vida, sin aplausos, sin reconocimiento humano. Murió como había vivido, en silencio, en pobreza, entregado. No hubo multitudes alrededor de su lecho. No hubo discursos. No hubo homenajes. Solo Dios. Y, sin embargo, su vida había cambiado el destino de miles. Manos que estaban condenadas a morir volvieron a abrazar. Cuerpos cubiertos de llagas volvieron a respirar sin dolor. Familias que se despedían volvieron a reunirse. Todo gracias a un hombre que eligió no huir del sufrimiento cuando el mundo entero corría en dirección contraria. Saint Roch no fue sacerdote, no fue obispo, no fue gobernante. Fue algo más raro y más necesario. Fue presencia. Presencia donde nadie quería estar. Presencia donde la muerte parecía tener la última palabra. Presencia donde el miedo había vaciado ciudades enteras. Por eso, cuando las epidemias regresan, cuando los hospitales se llenan, cuando el dolor se vuelve invisible y silencioso, su nombre vuelve a pronunciarse. En susurros, en oraciones cansadas, en habitaciones donde la esperanza parece extinguirse. Saint Roch es invocado, no solo como sanador del cuerpo, sino como compañero del abandono, porque él estuvo allí, cuando nadie más quiso estar. Su historia nos recuerda verdades incómodas, pero eternas, que servir cuesta, y cuesta caro, que amar de verdad implica riesgo, renuncia y heridas, que la santidad no se mide en prestigio, sino en cuántas vidas tocaste, cuando nadie estaba mirando, y que Dios no siempre actúa con rayos ni truenos. A veces actúa con pan sencillo, traído por un perro fiel, en medio de un bosque oscuro, porque cuando el mundo ya no envía a nadie, Dios todavía envía ayuda, y eso lo cambia todo.